one of the greatest like levers of like life design and control we have in our lives is choosing what is within a 5 or 10 minute walk of us. And that matters more than almost any other decision you can make about like how and where you live. It doesn't matter what is 20 minutes away in your city. That might as well be like on another planet in some ways. It's like the 5 to 10 minute walk radius is what matters. And so you have control over what goes in that radius. And that is your great power to control your behavior in the future. So put your favorite people in there and choose the places around you very wisely and invest in the places around you. Invest in the neighborhood, invest in your relationship in the neighborhood. And that's how you build a great life for yourself.
Welcome back to the Fitt Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Veneri. Today I'm joined by Phil Levin, founder and CEO of LiveNearFriends. In this episode, we discuss building neighborhoods to promote social wellness. Phil talks about transforming real estate to encourage community. Plus, we cover the law of proximity, communes, country clubs, blue zones, and more. Let's get into it. Today's episode is brought to you by EGYM. EGYM provides fitness and health facilities with smart workout solutions built on its ecosystem of hardware, software, and partners. But it's more than cool tech. Their connected training experience delivers business results while helping members reach their wellness goals. If you run a gym, health club, YMCA, or any kind of fitness facility, you should check them out. Visit egym.com to learn more. Hi, Phil. Welcome to Fitt Insider. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Joe. Excited to be here.
Yeah, lots to chat about. Certainly a very cool and varied background that you have, a lot of interesting stuff that you're working on now. I think I first discovered you on Twitter when you were talking about launching or had just launched LiveNearFriends. But for folks who aren't familiar, could you just give us the quick background and then we'll get into what you're working on now?
Yeah, sure. So the sort of question that like animates my career is how do we make our housing aid our happiness, our connectedness, our health? The sort of thing I believe is like right now our housing is really letting us down. Our housing is causing us to drive more instead of walk more. It's causing us to be lonely instead of be connected. And I think we can build better housing and better lifestyles for people. And that sort of quest has really animated like much of what I've done in the last decade.
How did you come to that realization? And then what was the translating that to like, oh, this is how I can apply it or change it, or, what comes of that?
Yeah, sure. Uh, so there's sort of like a personal track for me, and there's like a professional track, and then they intertwine. Actually, a person I give a lot of credit to is my wife, Kristen. So she's a professional behavioral scientist, and when we started dating, and we were sort of having the like let's move in together conversation, she like sat me down and said, "There's like one behavioral science principle we're always going to live by." And I'm like, "Okay, what is it?" And she's like, we want to be very careful about what we put in close proximity to ourselves because the things that are close and easy will do more, and the things that are far away will do less. So we sort of started talking about like the way we wanted to live, and like a lot of this was like, hey, like the thing that really like causes us to be happy and do more and be the best versions of ourselves, it's usually the people around us. And so like let's be very intentional, very thoughtful about like putting our favorite people very close to us. So there's as little friction to living with them as possible. So we actually, when we moved in together, we rented this big mansion in San Francisco, and we moved 9 of our friends in with us. That was like our move in together moment. And we're like, these are our favorite people. They inspire us. We're gonna live with them. That was fantastic, and we've sort of been living in this like sort of people focused way for ever since we've been together. We live in a different place, which I'll talk about in a second. Um, but I think this sort of like took me down this path of like, man, it's like the way we like lay out our housing has really nothing to do with this right now. And maybe we could do better. And so around this time, I also had met Ryan and Jeff, who were cooking up the idea for Cul-de-sac, which is a company that the three of us started. And Cul-de-sac is building walkable, car-free neighborhoods from scratch in the U.S. We launched Cul-de-sac in 2018 as a company. It actually just opened up last year. The first one's a 1,000-person walkable neighborhood in Tempe, Arizona, where instead of walking out your door and seeing pavement, you walk out your door and have walking paths and courtyards and people and bikes and sort of the things that encourage you to be more active and healthy. And yeah, so that's cul-de-sac. And after that, I've done a couple other projects, and just launched a company called LiveNearFriends, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a bit.
What is that living situation now? So how have you maintained that kind of commitment you made to your wife that, you moved your friends and all kind of like co-living and basically started your own community. And now it certainly sounds like that has evolved. How have you maintained that, I guess, in your personal life?
Yeah. So I think this like principle of people in proximity is the core principle, but like how we like manifest that changes over time. So, back when we were like in our late 20s or early 30s, like living in a mansion with a friend in San Francisco was the thing we wanted. We sort of saw the writing was on the wall though, and we're like, oh, our friends are coupling up and starting to talk about kids. This setup is not going to work in that future. We need something else. And so we started a new community in Oakland called Radish, and Radish is sort of like a place designed around the same principle, which is like, let's have our people around, but like out, sort of catering to the idea that like little creatures were soon going to arrive, and we need different things. And so, Radish is it's a 10 unit sort of complex, spread across 6 buildings. People have their own, for the most part, private units, private bathrooms. They have more space. It's co-owned by a lot of the individuals there, so there's 23 co-owners. And right now we have 19 people living there, and there's 5 kids under the age of 2. And so we cook dinner together. We have this like central communal building we use to cook dinner together. We help take care of each other's kids, and we keep each other sort of sane in this like very crazy time of having infants and toddlers in our life.
Yeah, it's interesting and selfishly part of the reason I wanted to have this conversation. One is because I think this is such an important aspect of overall well-being that often gets overlooked, and we can kind of talk about why that is and maybe how to change it. But basically, family has been core to my life, a big Italian family where everybody on both sides of the family all kind of lived in the same neighborhood. And we spent not only holidays and birthdays together, but every Sunday and oftentimes throughout the week, and many meals and childcare and all of those things throughout my life. I say, I didn't really have friends until I was 16 years old in high school because all my friends were my cousins, and that's all I really knew. And my brother and I, we work together and own Fitt Insider. But we've always kind of said we want to have a compound. We want to have this kind of maybe sprawling land, farmland, and have a hub where everybody hangs out, but our separate houses, and really this idea of like building this community, and hopefully friends can move on to the land as well. And as time has gone on, it's been really interesting to hear kind of more and more people talk about this, like this idea of how do we create these communities. And I think in your sense, you've done it kind of formally as a business, and starting that and trying to scale and what that looks like with cul-de-sac, and Radish sounds like a smaller kind of version of that. Where, like, what are the options for people when they start to think about that? Like, hey, we want to do this. We'd rather not urban sprawl, live off in maybe a cookie cutter neighborhood by ourselves and have to drive everywhere and be totally isolated. Like, how do you solve this problem if like you're an individual? And then maybe we can talk about it from like a business perspective after that.
Yeah, yeah. So Joe, I think the like fantasy you're talking about is a super common one. And like I see this basically like every week on TikTok or Instagram. There's some meme that goes viral about like people are like, I wanna buy a piece of land and move all my friends there. And I think like, if you look at like the comment section of these posts, everyone's like, me too. And they start tagging their friends. But I think there's like this like gap between the fantasy version of it and the reality version of it, where people sort of say like, well, it's not really possible. I'm not going to do it, or it's like too much work. And I think the key is like it is possible. We've done it. We know a lot of people that have done it. We're going to be actually writing a lot of case studies about people that have done it. But you sort of need to like scope the project in a way that where it can actually get done. So like I think for most people, the idea that like you're gonna buy a big piece of rural land and like move 30 people out there, some people can pull that off. It's probably not gonna happen for a lot of people. That's a big change of lifestyle. Um, but you can actually start much smaller and easier. So like you can choose to rent a apartment in the same apartment building as your brother. You can guys can choose to like buy a duplex and live in both units of the duplex. And what's nice about that is like when the two of you start doing that and take that like first easy step, it makes it really easy for your cousin to then be like, oh, I want to get on their same block. And now there's three of you. And then once there's three of you, that other cousin's coming too. Now there's four of you. And over time, what you're going to see is actually like your 30-person thing is possible. You're not jumping from 0 to 30. You're jumping from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. And most of these successful examples we've seen of this, they're more like incremental. They're more that starts with like 2 or 3 or 4, and then it builds from there. And that's really been our experience. So like Radish is actually now, if you include all the people who have like moved near us, who don't actually like live on our sort of central campus, we're like over 30 people now. That's happened over 5 years. We started at 7, and sort of like every year we add half a dozen people, and now it's like it's sort of hard for now our friends like to choose not to live near us because it's almost like a big statement to do that. And I think this like get like a strong base and then build incrementally is the way that we see this happen. And live near friends is about sort of that process.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So obviously you're deep in this world. You're personally like have embraced it and living it. And then you think, okay, there are obviously other people who want to do this and you want to enable that for them. Live near friends at this point is basically like, hey, this is where I live. Tell me when things around me come up for sale and we can hopefully move our friends there. How did that originate? Why is it this concept and what does it look like as it evolves?
Yeah, totally. So live near friends sort of came out of like, we did this Radish thing. It was really hard to do. It's a complicated project. And I started just getting emails from folks like every week being like, I want to do this. How do I do this? How do I do this? And I was like, you know, I'm like, what's the easiest version that gets you like 80% of the benefit of this, but takes like 10% the effort? It was sort of like, and like, I'm going to try to create a company out of that. And so Live Near Friends is a social real estate platform, and its goal is to sort of try to bridge this like fantasy that people have of all wanting to live on the same block with the like reality of how you actually do it. And so we provide like the recipes for how you actually do that in practical reality. It's basically a tool that allows people to help coordinate, like sell their friends on this idea, and then actually like go through the steps of like finding the real estate, and like sort of negotiating the things you need to with your friends, and then making it happen. And so it's and maybe to sort of give an example of how like you might use it for your use case. Um, you would go and live near friends. You would say, "Hey, I'm creating like Joe's mini neighborhood." You basically create a page about Joe's main neighborhood, what your goals are, and you would share a link with your brother and your cousins and whoever, and your friends, and be like, come, let's do Joe's mini neighborhood, and they'd be able to like browse real estate all within a short walk of where you're trying to do this, and then you guys can like converse about the houses and sort of have like a fun social experience like doing real estate together in like multiplayer mode rather than in single player mode, which is how most people look for real estate. And so it's like a mix of like a sales tool, a CRM, and like a listings service. But it's sort of aimed at like all the behavioral mechanics that need to happen to actually make this thing a reality in like very practical terms for you.
Yeah, it's cool. It's been cool to play with. I think, like I said, I first discovered it maybe just on social or Twitter, and then we were working on some content around this idea of intentionally designed communities and what that looks like. There's obviously overlap with wellness and wellness real estate, and on the other side, mobility and micromobility and just walkability, all those things. And people, I think, saw it in the newsletter, and I had started mentioning in conversation. It was almost this thing that, like you said, when people post online about the compound, everybody was like, "Yeah, send me that. Please send me that link. I definitely want to learn more about it," because they are trying to figure out how to do this for themselves. Um, for what you're working on with it, I was curious because from the outside looking in, it could be like, oh, this is like a cool side project, or this is a cool, maybe this like a puzzle piece that fits into another ecosystem that you're building, all the things you're working on. Do you see this as a standalone business that you want to grow? And if so, in what direction? Like, what role is this playing, and how far along are you in the process?
Yeah, it's very much a business. We actually just we just closed the funding round for the business, um, and started building a team. So I'll sort of take you to like the end state and maybe work backwards a bit. So My goal is I want people to build real estate differently than they do today. Right now, they build real estate for individual atomic actors. So, like, I'm building for a family, I'm building for an individual who's going to live in a studio. I want a lot of real estate in the future to be built with like groups in mind. And it doesn't need to be 20 people, it can be two people, it can be three people, it can be four people. But that's what it means to like build towards connectedness and happiness. This is one of the big factors in people's like health and wellness is like, are they around people? They like and can support them. And so to make that happen, we need like developers thinking differently about how they do this. And for developers to think differently about how they do this, they didn't know there's demand for this. And so an analogy I use is Airbnb. Airbnb basically like invented the short-term rental industry. Like it existed beforehand, of course, but like, you know, what because Airbnb exists, you basically have developers, home flippers, owners, like changing the actual form factor of real estate to sort of service Airbnb's demand. So you have whole like towns that are popping up to be like Airbnb towns almost. It's actually changing the forms of our cities and our towns that Airbnb like put all these people in one place who have this demand for a short-term rental. And it's changed, but it's like restructured the real estate industry in some ways. I want to do the same thing for this form of the housing. I call it proximate housing, just as like a shorthand. But it's like the developer today that is building the sort of like subdivision with the McMansions. I want them tomorrow to be building like cottage courtyards and sort of proximate housing forms that are more fit for I think what people will want in the future and what's actually going to make them happy.
The Fitt Insider Podcast is brought to you by our friends at EGYM. This is an exciting partnership for us, and not just because EGYM makes some of the most innovative fitness products out there, but because the entire EGYM team, led by their CEO Philip, is committed to making health, fitness, and well-being more accessible for everyone. And that's a mission we can get behind. By combining their smart equipment with integrated software and hundreds of connected partner brands, EGYM helps fitness facilities stand out by delivering a personalized, gamified workout experience that improves outcomes and member engagement. So if you're a gym or health club operator thinking about how to best serve your members while driving business results, go see what EGYM is up to at egym.com. When you think about this, get like that shift, I think of it, there's obviously, like we've already talked about, folks that kind of have this realization for themselves and they aren't quite sure how to do it. And then there's like the anecdotal, oh, we did it, whatever the friend group is or the family. And this is why it's so fantastic. And this is why we enjoy it. And then there's maybe a bunch more folks who are curious and others who need to be convinced, and especially down the path of shifting like real estate development. When you're kind of pitching it from the business perspective, from the health and well-being perspective, what are you selling them on to continue this momentum down this path of like, this is why we need this shift and this is why it's so important?
Yeah, you're talking about people in the real estate industry or investors or
Yeah, just in general, from folks who maybe they're not the folks that are sitting there saying like, hey, I want to do this personally, right? And are looking for options. They're on that side. Maybe it's a real estate investor, maybe a developer, maybe the property owners, like all of those things to like actually make this a reality. And yeah, just think about like, this is the kind of problem and business case for it outside of the personal or anecdotal demand for it.
yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, these things scale when there's like an economic case for the actors to scale it. So like, it's not me coming on podcast and saying this is good for people is not gonna create this reality. This reality will be created when real estate agents, real estate developers, and real estate owners are like, I can make more money doing doing it this way than the other way. And that's the story of Airbnb, right? This is Airbnb has not had to go develop all this real estate on their own. Like they've gotten like 10,000 different actors all over the country, all over the world to do it for them. And so the way you make this happen is you need to put enough demand in a single place where people can like see the demand and understand the demand, and then put enough proof points out there where they understand what's the case. And so I'll give you one example of like proof points that I think we already have. Actually, I'll give you two examples. So example number one is there's a study out there that shows if you have a friend that lives in your apartment building, you are 30% more likely to renew your lease in that apartment building. Lease churn is one of the biggest costs if you are a multifamily property owner. So there's a big economic incentive for them to get a friend in a building for someone. They don't need to be good-hearted to do that. They can be capitalists and believe that. Another example is on the real estate agent side. So if you're a real estate agent, if anyone's listening, give me a call. The two things they care most about are the quality of their leads. So like, is this person actually going to buy this home or not? And basically how many houses they need to show them in order for them to buy a home. Those are the two things they care most about. Uh, if your brother is trying to buy, or your cousin trying to buy the house near you and your brother, they're going to buy that house with high probability. They're going to overpay for the house versus a random person because it's more valuable for them than it is for the random person because it's the house next to the two of you. And they're not going to look at 50 houses in 100 neighborhoods. They're going to buy that house, yes or no. This is the best possible lead a real estate agent could ever get their hands on. And we think agents will want to serve this population with a higher priority than they would some random person who fills out something on some listing site.
There's two things that kind of come to mind, like thinking about this. There's obviously and I alluded to it, like the push towards wellness real estate, which is like super high end. And yes, there are intentionally designed communities and they're building everything, and some of which is super extravagant, like basically biohacking within their home. And everything's designed in like this super compelling way to make it better for your health and wellness. And then there's also like a commune, like on the almost the other end of the spectrum, like everybody come co-locate and we'll figure it out and basically run our own little society. Do you have to kind of clarify, combat, distinguish from that in terms of like how you see the world evolving and like where you get to with this platform? And what have the conversations been like down that path as you're saying like, nah, it's not quite like those things, like, and this is how it's different?
Yeah, so some of these things are very strongly culturally coded in like interesting ways. And so one example I give is like, you know, you think of a commune, you think of a bunch of like lefty hippies. You think of like a country club, and you think of a bunch of like rich conservatives. And in my mind, underlying both these things is the same truth, right? It's like people trying to like organize themselves to like support each other and like live a happy life. But like the cultural coding of this stuff is really important. And I think this plays out. This plays out in the realm of culture as much as economics. I think there's like a couple images that people have in their head, which I think are wrong. So one is like the frat house. Oh, if people living together, it's like a frat house, and it's like, yeah, it was that way when we were 18-year-olds, like in college, like all stuff in the house. But like you know, at Radish, like we all live in our separate units, and we're in our 30s and 40s. It's just a very different environment. It doesn't feel like a frat house at all. We're a little boring actually sometimes. Um, and I think the other one's the hippie thing that people think about. But I think we need like more examples out there of just like aspirational forms of this that people see that's like relevant for whatever their context is that they can look up to. So we're just trying to put as many examples as we can, and like it's just going to look different in different places.
Obviously, the other aspect of this is thinking about all the benefits, not only the fun of it for some folks, but the benefits from childcare to social well-being to having relationships, and hopefully some of the other aspects of being outdoors more, interacting with people. A lot of these elements getting built into something like a cul-de-sac. When you think of like the long-term societal benefit, right? So the kind of business aspect is working and people are doing the kind of co-living or co-locating for culture and society. Do you have bigger aspirations to kind of shift the division or maybe tribalism, without getting too political about the whole thing, but just like we're so disconnected that like solving loneliness, like this path is a path to doing that is not a crazy radical shift?
I think like the bigger like maybe story here is like the neighborhood as like an entity. And I think right now, I think neighborhoods are hurting. So there used to be like all of these like neighborhood organizations that were like sort of cornerstones of people's lives, and nothing's really popped up to replace them in like our like proximate physical world. Like I think there's a lot going on online that is replacing some of this stuff, but I think we also just need things in the flesh sometimes. Um, and so I sort of think about like how do we rebuild the neighborhood institution? And one thing that's like working against us right now is transients. So we live in a remote work world. People change jobs more often. So it's really easy to move. Uh, People just aren't stuck to their neighborhoods, which means they don't have allegiance to their neighborhoods. And I saw a stat which I think it's like 16% of people feel like very, very close to their neighborhood or very much part of their neighborhood. It's like a very low percentage. Um, I hope all these like sort of like mini friend groups can be like almost like the seeds for like future neighbor institutions almost. And my hope is like in 50 years you look back and it's like, what's this really cool neighborhood organization? Where did it come from? And I was like, oh, it was like Joe, his brother, and his cousin started like doing stuff in the park and like planting a garden, and now it's the neighborhood association. Like 50 years later, but you sort of need some like seed that's like stable and like feels present and like cares about the thing to like be the thing that like can rebuild something. And like it's not going to be next door. I think it's got to be something that like very much is about social relationships between the individuals who live in a place.
Yeah, absolutely. When you think of like I don't know if the right word is like core customer or demographic or persona that, obviously making this shift and having it resonate with people who want to do it, not talking about like the real estate aspect at this particular moment, like getting this message to them, is it convincing them or is it educating them? Like, have you kind of figured that part out? Like, there is a recognition of it, and we both shared kind of anecdotes of personally and also seeing it on social media and elsewhere and in conversations. But it's like that seed is kind of planted, and like, what's the accelerant? Like, what is the next phase of that?
Yeah. Um, so I think it's two things. The first one I sort of call it the gay nephew effect. Actually, something else came up with this, which is how did gay marriage go from something that was like unthinkable to something that was like legalized in the U.S. legislature? And like the story you would sort of see again and again is like the senator who was opposed to it had a nephew who was gay, and it's like, oh, like I get it now. I'm now in favor of this. So I think part of the accelerant is actually just like more examples in the wild that people like have a personal connection to. And for me, it's like I didn't understand this stuff at all until I like moved to San Francisco and met my wife Kristen, and now I'm working it professionally. It's like exposure. Exposure matters a lot, and I think one accelerant is actually just like more exposure and more examples. And like if it goes from like fantasy to something I can do if I see somebody I know doing it. That's sort of the gay nephew effect, and then the other effect is like the real estate equation being made much easier, and this is what LiveNearFriends is trying to do. We're trying to like make the real estate part of this easy, because like most people are not real estate developers. We want to like present to them on a menu like a thing they can just buy off the menu, and not have to like figure out how to like hack real estate together.
Yeah, I think those are two great points. And down that path, as we get towards the end of the conversation, what does you mentioned working on scaling Live Near Friends, just raising funding. What does that roadmap, near term roadmap look like? And then maybe we'll push out a little bit further after we chat through the near term plan.
Yeah. So we have a live site. We're excited to have visitors. We're going to be doing partnerships with real estate agents, ADU builders, and multifamily owners to basically like provide supply to people, like real estate supply to people who want to live together. Is sort of the near term plan. We're going to be putting out a lot of content, a lot of case studies, a lot of how to on our site pretty soon. So you can sign up for that. That's sort of what the next year looks like.
Yeah, and then I guess my next question and potentially last is like if we push out into the future, what do you aspire this impact to be? Is it X number of people who have chosen to live this way? Is it a shift in the real estate such that it's more favorable to, increasing access for people who want to do this? Is it a health and well-being neighborhood like metric, or probably some combination of those things?
I think it has something to do with what I call like the iron law of proximity. I'll abstract this out of like the friend thing for a second, which is like we do the things that are easy and we like don't do the things that are hard to do. And it's like such a banal point. But I think sometimes we really don't like absorb that point into our behavior. And so like if you move to a place and the nearest place to eat is a pizza place, I can guarantee you are baking in you gaining weight in the future just because you moved near a pizza place. If you move near a supermarket, you're going to cook more. If you move near a place with a bike path, you're going to bike more. If you move near a place with nowhere to walk, you're going to drive more. And so I think I want basically the way we design our cities and the way people make individual choices to be very, very sensitive to this idea that like the iron law of proximity determines our behavior. And one of the greatest like levers of like life design and control we have in our lives is choosing what is within a 5 or 10 minute walk of us. And that matters more than almost any other decision you can make about like how and where you live. It doesn't matter what is 20 minutes away in your city. That might as well be like on another planet in some ways. It's like the 5 to 10 minute walk radius is what matters. It's your walk shed. And the iron law of proximity is going to determine how you behave. And so you have control over what goes in that radius. And that is your great power to control your behavior in the future. So put your favorite people in there and choose the places around you very wisely and invest in the places around you. Invest in the neighborhood, invest in your relationships in the neighborhood. And that's how you build a great life for yourself.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic insight. And oftentimes, what gets left out of the equation when we think about everything's almost, I don't want to say feel trapped, but it's almost an afterthought. It's like all these things happen. And why did they happen? Well, it's because we weren't taking this, whether it's proximity or just what is removing the friction to the things that we want and down the path of health and wellness and exercise and physical activity. It's so interesting to hear, it's somewhat debated blue zones and where the longest living populations and people are, but take it or leave it in terms of the research. The one thing that is pretty obvious is that they don't necessarily try to live that way. They're not trying to live longer. They're just living. They're just living their life, and all these things are embedded in how they live that ultimately work in their favor. Yeah. So, last question for real this time. What should we look out for? You mentioned the site. You mentioned the content. What's the best way for people to get in touch, follow along, and anything that should be top of mind that you want to call attention to?
Yeah. Check out LiveNearFriends.com and you can follow me or follow it. We just actually started social media there. Not much there yet, but you can follow you can follow me on Twitter, and I will make sure you get all the content, how tos, and stories of people doing this if you want this in your own life.
Yeah, perfect. We'll have everything linked up in the show notes. Encourage people to check it out. I think it's a really awesome and much needed concept in business, and hopefully shift as we think about helping people live more intentionally and live healthier lives. So thanks so much for joining us, Phil.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. This was fun.
One more thing before you head out. Help us spread the word. Take a minute to rate and review the podcast, subscribe to the YouTube channel, or share this episode with a friend. And if you like conversations like this, you'll love the Fitt Insider newsletter. We send it every Tuesday. The link is in the description. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you back here next week.